It was an unusual by-election. And to break down the numbers, I've got Andy Yan, the director of the Simon Fraser University City Program, frequent guest here on the Breaker.News podcast, and the Duke of Data. Andy, thanks for joining us. You've produced what's called a geography of the 2025 civic by-elections in the city of Vancouver. Let's look at the first couple of slides where you had the left winning out. You had Sean Orr from Cope and Lucy Maloney from One City. They were the winners.
You bet. And always a pleasure, Bob, to always be on to be on your show once the technology works. And okay, here we go. And I in one way, it's just really kind of starting off with what we know. And clearly, Sean Orr and Lucy Maloney clearly won in the last by-election by a pretty substantial lead. And I think that what's interesting about what you do with this type of analysis is go in and break that down towards the respective voting places that were spread throughout the city of Vancouver, as well as advanced and mail-in polls, which I think give you a sense of really not only who won, but then where did they win? And I think that there's a little bit of a caveat just to be aware that voters in the city of Vancouver are not assigned voting places, much less during a by-election, and that people have the ability to just go wherever they can to vote. So that's an important kind of caveat to understand this. But at the same time, it's also interesting to note that really where the votes went in terms of which candidate and where they lie. And then I think that really kind of illustrates, I think, the other underlying social and economic and political geographies in the region. So it's kind of neat in terms of, say, breaking it down in just these types of breakdown. First thing we note is that when it came to advanced polling, it actually in a great degree kind of reflects the larger polling in terms of Sean Orr leading, and then Lucy Maloney, and then followed by Colleen Hardwick towards that advanced voting poll. And similarly, we'll see some slight changes, but not too many changes in terms of voting percentages, that with Sean Orr leading, and then Lucy Maloney, and then followed by Colleen Hardwick. So, I mean, so far you kind of see these patterns just kind of hold pretty solidly for the overall by-election, and then how it kind of just, I think, really then changes in terms of looking at how different polls reported and where the strengths of each candidate were. The way these maps are designed are really, the intention is to concentrate on distribution, so that anything that's purple or red is distinctly concentrated, a distinct concentration of voters for each candidate, followed then by yellow, and then the various blues, with dark blue being the lowest level of support for the area of support for the candidate. So I mean, that's really one of the kind of elements of really what happened in terms of who the winners were in this by-election, because when we kind of look at Sean Orr and then shift on over to Lucy Maloney, you see some changes. You see where Lucy Maloney was much more focused, perhaps in that kind of central core of the city, certainly around Kensington Cedar Cottage was the voting place where she received the most amount of votes, and then followed over by Mount Pleasant and then Granville Woodlands. So it kind of parallels each other, and I think that really talks to how when it seems to be when people voted for Sean Orr, they would typically then tick off Lucy Maloney, or vice versa.
You know, the Greens, of course, Adrienne Carr retired. She triggered the second seat that was available in the by-election. Take a look at Annette Riley.
She had 2 points of strength, one in Kensington Cedar Cottage, and then over in the West End, which I think is actually pretty interesting to kind of see how, unlike other candidates, the other candidates kind of had a very clear cluster.
Colleen Hardwick, who was running to get back onto city council, she of course ran for the mayoralty and finished third in 2022. She finished third in the city council by-election here in 2025. Now let's look at where she was strong.
And I think that within Colleen Hardwick, again, it's a very distinct geography. Her area of support clearly was on the west side of Vancouver. It's in the polls in Kitsilano, Dunbar, and Kerrisdale. But anywhere east of that, east of really the Falls Creek, the Falls Creek Community Center, she really didn't do that well. That you really see how she didn't make any inroads in the upper in the northeast corner of the city, and the rest of the city there was just really, I think, the low levels of support for Colleen Hardwick.
And Theodore Abbott was her running mate. Let's take a quick look at Theodore Abbott.
Theodore's patterns actually also parallel those of Colleen, that you really kind of see where Colleen Hardwick again were strong points, but similarly Theodore Abbott's elements were also similar strong points.
The bottom of the standings, when you look at the party affiliated candidates, Jamie Stein and Ralph Kaiser. Let's take a look at them.
Here's the map for Jamie Stein. And again, really the strong points for Jamie Stein were south of 41st, that in the various, well, whether it's West 41st or East 41st, that was really the polls through which he had the strongest turnout. But what's interesting about Jamie Stein and just the other ABC candidates were actually how well they did in Yaletown. And I think that really kind of, again, talks to really the political geography of Vancouver, where downtown is actually, and interestingly, downtown in Yaletown is much more conservative. You think about really whom they voted in. I mean, that was also Sam Sullivan's old riding provincially. That this really kind of reflects the kind of politics that the kind of political leanings of those living in Yaletown, and you see that is one of the strong points for the ABC candidates. Now, the fact of the matter is that anywhere else in the city of Vancouver, they didn't do as well. There were very weak turnout support, and which overall reflected their overall outcomes in terms of their standings. That you really see that in the northeast section of the city, they got very few votes. In the central part of the city, they got very few votes, and interestingly, in West Point Grey, that they didn't do very well in really what I guess one way you would have thought would be a very high levels of home ownership, as well as just a place for which you would see support for a more, say, right-wing candidate, but that didn't happen in this by-election. And so Jamie Stein really, again, parallels with really Ralph Kaiser's turnout. And again, the areas really south of 41st Avenue, east and west, were areas of support for Ralph Kaiser's. But then similarly to his running mate, Yaletown ended up to be a fairly strong area for ABC.
Oh, one more slide. Okay.
Oh. There's one more, and just to kind of piece it all together, we really have this last slide to kind of really see how all the candidates really ended up along each other, and you really see where the support of Orr and Maloney were in the northeast section of the city, as well as in the large parts of the downtown peninsula, with some slight changes in the Yaletown area. And then similarly, when you kind of look in the southwest and southeast parts of the city, you'll see perhaps more support for ABC to occur there. But I think with ABC, it's just interesting to note that really the areas of support for ABC is just South Vancouver as opposed to North Vancouver, which breaks, I think, this kind of typical understanding of how Vancouver split between East and West, but that really you kind of really see the strength of ABC really being in the southern parts of the city of Vancouver. Certainly Cope, as well as One City, have a strength in the east and particularly the northeast section of the city. And Colleen Hardwick with Team have a really strong showing in the west side of Vancouver.
And finally, What does this all mean on the road to 2026, the October 2026 general civic election?
I mean, you got to remember the turnout here was only about 15%. That the voter turnout here was 15%, which I bet was a bit higher than it was with the Bremner by-election, which was 11%. But then similarly, we're talking not about a really large field here. Is that your typical civic turnout is at best maybe 35%. Oh, I think ABC is going to have to, feel the vibes as well as kind of increase the swagger if they if they're concerned about re-election.
Well, there you have it, straight from Andy Yan, the Duke of Data, joining us on the Breaker.News. Andy Yan, the director of the city program at Simon Fraser University.
Always a pleasure.